Excuse me, mister. The little girl's voice barely reached above a whisper. Do you know anyone who wants a child? The entire diner stopped breathing. Marcus Cole, 6'4", 260 pounds of scars and iron, slowly looked down from his coffee cup. The girl couldn't have been older than 7, barefoot, dress torn at the shoulder, a smear of dirt across her cheek like someone had dragged her face against the ground. And on her left arm, bruises shaped exactly like a grown man's fingers. Marcus set down his cup and quietly locked the front door. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next will stay with you for a long time. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Painted Rattler Diner sat on the edge of nowhere, 22 miles outside of Henderson, Nevada, right where the highway stopped pretending to lead anywhere worth going. The sign out front had lost the P in painted 3 summers ago, and nobody had bothered to fix it. The air conditioning worked exactly half the time. The coffee was thick enough to stand a spoon in. And on a Thursday night in the middle of July, with the desert heat still radiating up through the asphalt at 10 o'clock at night, the place was about a quarter full of people who all shared one thing in common. They were passing through, and none of them planned to stay. Marcus Graveyard Cole had been coming to the Painted Rattler for 11 years. He wasn't passing through. He sat in the back booth, always the same one, the one with a clear sight line to both the front door and the kitchen hallway, with a black coffee in front of him and a plate of eggs he hadn't touched yet. His leather vest was draped over the back of the seat. The patches on it told a story anyone in 3 states would recognize. The Death's Head, the bottom rocker, Nevada. The top rocker that needed no explanation to anyone with eyes. Hell's Angels. He was 49 years old, and he looked like he'd spent every single one of those years doing something that left a mark. His hands were enormous, knuckles thickened from use. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to the edge of his jaw. A gift from a man who was no longer in any condition to give gifts to anyone. His gray hair was pulled back tight. His beard was close cropped and shot through with silver. People who didn't know Marcus looked at him and felt something animal wake up in their chest. Something very old that said, "Do not approach that thing." People who did know Marcus felt exactly the same way. The 2 truckers at the counter had their eyes forward. The couple in the middle booth had stopped talking when he walked in and hadn't started again. The waitress, a heavy-set woman named Donna, who'd been working the Rattler for going on 9 years, moved around his section with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned, through careful trial and error, to stay out of the man's orbit unless he asked for something. He hadn't asked for anything yet. He was thinking. That was the part people never understood about Marcus Cole. They saw the size of him, saw the patches, saw the way rooms rearranged themselves around his presence, and they assumed there was nothing going on behind those dark eyes except violence waiting for a reason to happen. His own club brothers had made that mistake when he first patched in, back when he was 22 and had just come home from a place overseas that he didn't discuss and didn't need to discuss because the way he carried himself described it well enough. The truth was that Marcus was always thinking, always watching, always calculating the distance between where things were and where they were about to go, which is why he noticed the girl before she even made it through the door. The diner's entrance chime was a little electronic ding, nothing special, but Marcus had cataloged every variation of it over 11 years. The sound it made when a big man pushed through fast. The sound it made when the wind caught the door. The sound it made when someone small and light stepped through carefully, like they were trying not to be heard. This was that last sound. He looked up. She was small, very small, 7 years old maybe. He wasn't good at gauging children's ages, didn't have much reason to be. Her hair was blonde and tangled, like it hadn't seen a comb in a few days. Her dress was pale yellow, the kind of dress a little girl might wear to a birthday party, except it was torn at the left shoulder, and there was a long smear of reddish dirt down the front of it. Her feet were bare. Actually bare, no shoes, no socks. The bottoms of her feet were dark from the pavement. She stood just inside the door for a moment, and Marcus watched her scan the room the way he'd seen soldiers scan a room. Fast, methodical, her eyes moving across each face and then moving on. Looking for something. Looking for someone. He watched her eyes pass over the trucker closest to the door, pass over the couple, pass over Donna, who had looked up from the counter and opened her mouth to say something but hadn't quite gotten there yet. And then the girl's eyes found Marcus. He expected her to look away. Everyone looked away. She didn't. She squared her small shoulders, took a breath, and walked straight toward him. Every single person in the Painted Rattler watched it happen, and none of them moved. There was something about the way she walked, steady, deliberate, like she had made a decision and was seeing it through, that paralyzed the room. Donna had her hand on the counter and wasn't moving. The truckers had turned on their stools. Even Marcus, who had sat still through things that would have broken most men, felt something shift in his chest that he didn't have a name for. The girl stopped at the edge of his booth. She reached out and gripped the front of his leather vest with one small hand, not grabbing at it, not pulling, just holding it, like she needed something solid to hold on to. And then she looked up at him with eyes that were brown and enormous and completely dry. She had already finished crying. Whatever had happened to her, she had cried through it and come out the other side, and now she was done with tears and had moved on to something else. Something harder. "Excuse me, mister," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "Do you know anyone who wants a child?" The diner was completely silent. Not the polite, conversational kind of silence. The kind of silence that falls when something happens that doesn't fit into any category anyone prepared for. Donna had frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. One of the truckers had his fork halfway to his mouth and left it there. The couple in the middle booth were both staring with their mouths slightly open. Marcus looked at the girl for a long moment. He looked at her face. He looked at the tear in her dress. He looked at her dirty, bare feet, and then his eyes moved, slowly, carefully, to her left arm. 5 bruises, oval-shaped, evenly spaced. The pattern that a man's hand makes when it grabs a child's arm and doesn't let go. Something moved inside Marcus Cole's chest. Something that had been dormant for a very long time. Something cold and absolute, like a door swinging open onto a room full of darkness. He pulled his eyes back up to her face. "Sit down," he said quietly. She sat. He looked across the diner at Donna, who was still standing frozen with a coffee pot. "Donna," his voice was level, "bring her pancakes and milk." Donna moved. Then Marcus turned back to the girl and studied her face for a moment. She was looking at him without fear, which he found unusual. Most children who ended up near him, which wasn't often because he made a point of not ending up in situations that involved children, had a wide-eyed wariness about them that made sense. He was a large and frightening-looking man, and he knew it, and had never felt one way or another about it. It was simply a fact, like the Nevada heat, or the fact that the highway ran north to south. This girl was not wary of him. She looked, if anything, like she had done a calculation and arrived at a conclusion. And the conclusion was that he was exactly what she was looking for. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." "How old are you, Emily Carter?" 7. I'll be 8 in October." "Okay." He kept his voice even, like they were discussing something ordinary. "Now, what did you mean by what you just said to me?" Emily looked at him steadily. "What I said," she answered, "was what I meant. Derek, that's my mom's boyfriend, he told somebody on the phone that he was going to sell me. Tonight. He said he needed the money and that he'd found a buyer." She paused. "I heard him say it through the wall. He was in the kitchen and I was supposed to be asleep." The silence that followed that sentence was different from the diner's earlier silence. This one had weight to it. Marcus was aware of Donna standing very still behind the counter. He was aware of the truckers who had stopped pretending not to listen. He leaned forward slightly. "And where is Derek now?" "His trailer. About 4 miles that way." She pointed northeast, toward the darker end of the desert. "He doesn't know where I am yet, but he will soon." "Why'd you come here?" She met his eyes. "Because the light was on," she said simply. "And because when I looked in the window, you looked like the scariest person in there. And I figured if Derek showed up, he'd be more scared of you than you'd be of him." There it was. That was the calculation. 7 years old, and she had already understood something that took most people decades to figure out. That when the monsters come, you don't hide from the bigger monster. You stand next to it. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "How'd you get here? 4 miles is a long walk." "I ran most of it," Emily said. "It hurt because of no shoes, but I didn't want to go back inside to get them." "Why not?" "Because he was on the phone again, and this time I heard him say the name of the road." Marcus went very still. "What road?" "Airport Road," Emily said. "He said he'd meet somebody at the old airport on Airport Road at 3 in the morning." She looked at Marcus with those dry, steady eyes. "That's 4 hours from now." The information landed in Marcus's mind and organized itself immediately. Airport Road. The old Henderson Executive Airstrip, decommissioned for civilian use 6 years ago. Nothing out there now but cracked tarmac and a chain-link fence. Dark. Isolated. The kind of place where a transaction could happen without witnesses. Donna arrived with a short stack of pancakes and a tall glass of milk. She set them down in front of Emily with the careful quiet of someone trying not to disturb something fragile. Emily looked at the pancakes, and for just a moment, just one moment, Marcus saw something in her face that cracked open the composure she'd been carrying. A 7-year-old's hunger and exhaustion, raw and unguarded. Then she picked up the fork and started eating. "Emily," Marcus said, "before you ran, did you stop to get anything? Take anything with you?" She reached down beside her on the seat and pulled up a small red backpack that Marcus hadn't noticed her carrying, or rather, that he had noticed but filed away for later. She unzipped it and turned it so he could see inside. He looked at the contents of that backpack and felt the temperature in his mind drop about 20 degrees. Cash. A thick roll of it, 20s and 50s, rubber banded together, and underneath the cash 2 plastic bags, each containing a white crystalline substance that Marcus had seen enough times to identify without needing a lab. "I took his money and his stash," Emily said. Her voice was completely matter-of-fact. "I figured if I had his money and his drugs, he'd be too scared to go to the police when I ran, because then he'd have to explain why a 7-year-old had his meth." Marcus stared at her for a full 3 seconds. "You figured that," he said. "Yes." He leaned back in the booth. Something that might, on another face, have been the beginning of a smile, moved across the corner of his mouth and then disappeared. "How much cash is in there?" "I didn't count it, but it was all he had hidden in the wall, and he was very upset on the phone about not having money, so I think it's probably not enough for whatever he owes." "Who does he owe it to?" "The man on the phone. He called him—" Emily paused, chewing, thinking. "He called him Broker, like it was a name. Not Mr. something, just Broker." The name didn't register in Marcus's expression because Marcus had spent 2 decades training his face not to register things. But in the interior of his mind, something moved, something shifted, like a piece on a board moving to a new position. He knew that name. Not personally, not directly, but in the world that Marcus occupied, a world that ran parallel to the civilian world, sharing the same highways and roads and diners, but operating by entirely different laws, the name Broker had come up before. Whispered in conversations that stopped when Marcus entered a room. Referenced in connection with things that even men with very few moral limits looked away from. He picked up his phone and sent a text. 3 words. No punctuation. "Come to Rattler." He set the phone down. Emily, he said, does Derek know that you took his money and his drugs? Not yet, she said. He might by now. It's been about 40 minutes. And when he figures it out, he's going to be very angry, Emily said. But he's also going to be very scared, because whoever he owes money to is the kind of person you don't make angry. She paused. I heard Derek crying on the phone last week. Adults don't usually cry on the phone unless they're really scared. Marcus looked at her for a moment. You pay a lot of attention. I had to, Emily said simply. She went back to her pancakes. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. He glanced at the screen. 6 responses in 40 seconds. He put it back down. Donna, Marcus said. The waitress appeared immediately. She'd been hovering at the edge of his section since Emily sat down, torn between professional distance and the obvious pull of the situation. Lock the front door, Marcus said. Turn the sign to closed. Donna looked at him. Marcus, I can't just... I'll cover whatever you lose on the night, Marcus said. Lock the door. A moment. Then Donna went to the door, turned the deadbolt, and flipped the sign. The 2 truckers at the counter turned on their stools and looked at Marcus with a particular expression of men who were calculating how much trouble they were about to be in. Marcus looked at them without expression. You 2 can stay or you can go out the back. Your choice. But that front door is staying locked for a while. The first trucker looked at the second. Some wordless communication passed between them. The second trucker picked up his coffee cup. I'm fine right here, he said. Same, said the first. Marcus nodded once. Then he turned back to Emily, who had watched the entire exchange while steadily eating her pancakes. Emily, he said, your mother, where is she right now? Emily's face changed, just barely, a tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in the set of her jaw. At the trailer, she said. She was asleep when I left. She sleeps a lot. Does she know about Derek's plan? A pause. Emily put down her fork. She looked at the table for a moment, then looked back up at Marcus. My mom, she said carefully, doesn't always know things. She used to. She used to know everything. She used to read me stories and know my favorite things, and know when I was sad without me having to say it. She stopped. But then Dad died, and she started using Derek's stuff, and now she mostly doesn't know things anymore. The couple in the middle booth, a man and woman in their 50s who had been sitting in absolute silence since Marcus locked the door. The woman had her hand pressed over her mouth. The man had his arm around her. Marcus looked at Emily for a long moment. Okay, he said. His voice was very quiet. Here's what's going to happen. Some friends of mine are going to show up in the next few minutes. They're going to look like the most frightening things you've ever seen. Are you okay with that? Emily considered this. Are they like you? More or less. She nodded once. Okay. Good. Marcus reached across the table, slowly telegraphing the movement, and very gently closed the zipper on the red backpack. And this stays with me for now. Is that okay? Emily thought about it. Then she reached into the front pocket of her dress and pulled out a single $20 bill. I kept some, she said, in case I needed bus fare. He looked at the $20 bill. He looked at the 7-year-old girl who had stolen a drug dealer's cash and product, evaded capture, run 4 miles barefoot through Nevada desert, and walked into a room full of strangers and headed directly for the most dangerous-looking man she could find, because she had reasoned her way to the conclusion that this was her best option. This time, the almost smile made it to his face and stayed there for a second. Smart, he said. My dad always said, if you're going to do something, do it all the way, Emily said. She picked up her fork again. He was a Marine. What happened to him? He got sick, she said. 3 years ago. She paused. He would have known what to do about Derek. Yeah, Marcus said. I think he would have. The low rumble of engines reached them before the lights did, a deep, collective thunder that built from a distance into something you felt in your sternum. Donna had pressed herself against the back wall, both hands flat on the counter. The couple in the middle booth had gone rigid. Even the two truckers, who had committed to staying, were looking at the windows with expressions of people recalibrating what they had committed to. Emily looked up from her pancakes and listened to the sound. "Those are Harleys," she said. "Yes." "How many?" Marcus glanced at his phone. 15. She nodded like this was precisely what she had expected. Then she drank her milk. The engines cut, one by one, in a staggered sequence, and then the back door of the painted Rattler opened. Marcus had texted Donna's number 2, her nephew who worked a grill on weekends, to leave it unlocked. And they came in. Big men, leathered and patched and bearing the particular expressions of people who had been pulled away from something else and were waiting to find out why. Big Dan Reeves, 6'2", 300 pounds, with hands like loading dock equipment and a gold tooth that caught the light. Spider, who was lean where Dan was massive, with sleeve tattoos that ran up past his collar and cold eyes that were always in motion. Hatch, who was 47 and had been riding with Marcus for 20 years and could read Marcus's face the way a meteorologist reads a barometer. And a dozen more, filling the back half of the painted Rattler until the room felt smaller than its square footage. They stopped when they saw the girl. She looked back at them. The room held that moment for several seconds. 15 of the most feared motorcycle club members in Nevada staring at a 7-year-old girl sitting in a booth eating pancakes. And then Hatch, who had been in the club long enough to have seen most things, pulled up a chair and sat down across from Marcus. "Talk," he said. Marcus talked, quietly, efficiently, keeping his eyes on Emily as he laid it out. Derek Maddox, the trailer 4 miles northeast, the name Broker, Airport Road, 3 in the morning, the red backpack, the child in front of them who had engineered her own escape and walked into their world like she'd been doing it all her life. When he finished, Hatch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Broker. You sure that's the name she gave?" "Ask her yourself," Marcus said. Hatch looked at Emily. "Hey," he said. His voice came out gentler than he'd probably intended. "The name on the phone, you heard it clear?" "Broker," Emily said. She looked at Hatch without any particular expression. He said it twice. Derek said, "Yes, Broker, I understand." And then he started crying. Hatch looked at Marcus. Something passed between them that had no words, because they both knew what that name attached to. They both knew the shape of what lived under it. And they both knew that if Derek Maddox had gotten tangled up in that web, the threads ran in directions that a single drug dealer's trailer in the Nevada desert couldn't contain. Marcus stood. He pulled on his vest. He looked down at Emily, who was scraping the last of the syrup off her plate with the methodical focus of someone who had learned not to waste food. "Emily," he said, "you're going to stay here with Donna tonight. Nobody is going to come through that door that shouldn't. You understand?" She looked up. "What are you going to do?" "We're going to start with Derek," Marcus said. Emily set down her fork. She looked at him with those enormous brown eyes, and for just a moment, just a breath, he saw the 7-year-old underneath all that hard-won composure. The child who had lain awake in a trailer in the dark and heard her own mother's boyfriend negotiating a price for her on a cell phone. "He has a gun," she said quietly. "He keeps it in the freezer. He thinks nobody knows." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Now we know," he said, and he walked to the back door. 15 men followed him. The engines came alive again in the dark Nevada night, one after another, building into a sound like thunder that rolled across the desert floor and had nowhere to go but outward in every direction, into the empty dark, toward a trailer 4 miles northeast, where a man named Derek Maddox was about to discover that selling a child was the last bad decision he would ever have the opportunity to make. Behind them, in the booth, Emily Carter picked up her glass of milk, finished it, and set it down carefully in the center of the table. Then she folded her hands and waited. The desert night swallowed them whole. 15 Harleys moving together in the dark didn't sound like motorcycles. They sounded like weather, like something inevitable rolling across the flat, open land with no intention of stopping for anything that put itself in the way. Marcus rode at the front, not because he needed to lead, the club knew where they were going, but because he needed to feel the wind against his face and let it clear the particular kind of cold that had settled into him back at the diner. The cold that came from looking at a child's arm and counting fingerprints. He'd seen a lot in his life, more than he cared to arrange into any kind of order. But there was a specific category of wrong that even men who lived entirely outside conventional morality recognized instantly, viscerally, the way an animal recognizes fire, not through reason, but through something older and more fundamental. Marcus had been inside that category exactly twice before in his life, and both times it had ended badly for the people responsible. This was going to be the third time. Hatch pulled up alongside him for a moment, close enough to exchange a look. Hatch had his jaw set the way it got when something had moved past anger into something quieter and more permanent. Marcus gave him a single nod. Hatch dropped back into formation. 4 miles in the Nevada desert goes fast when you're not thinking about distance. The trailer materialized out of the dark ahead of them. A single wide unit sitting back off the road with a gravel driveway and a rusted pickup truck parked crookedly in front of it. One light on inside, throwing a yellowish smear across the curtains. The kind of light that said someone was awake and not happy about it. Marcus cut his engine 50 yards out. The others followed his lead, the thunder dying off one by one until there was only the desert quiet and 15 men dismounting in the dark, with the practiced economy of people who had done things like this before. Spider was already moving without being asked, circling wide around the back of the trailer. Hatch took up a position at the corner. Big Dan straightened his vest and cracked his knuckles once, a habit he'd had for as long as Marcus had known him, like a surgeon washing his hands before an operation. Marcus walked up to the front door and knocked. Not hard. Not a cop knock. Not a battering ram knock. A normal knock. 3 measured raps. The kind that says, "I know you're in there, and I am not in a hurry, and that should scare you more than if I was." Nothing for 3 seconds. Then movement inside. Quick, scrambling movement. The sound of something being knocked over, a muttered curse. Marcus knocked again. "Derek," he said. His voice was conversational. "Open the door. I'm not going to stand out here all night." A long pause. Then the curtain on the nearest window moved a fraction of an inch, and Marcus felt the brief pressure of being looked at, assessed, cataloged. He stood perfectly still with his hands at his sides and let Derek Maddox look. The bolt turned. The door opened 6 inches, held by a chain, and a face appeared in the gap. Thin, unshaven, with a particular hollowness around the eyes that came from a combination of too much meth and not enough sleep. Derek Maddox was maybe 35 but looked 50. His eyes were moving fast, to Marcus, to the men visible behind Marcus, to the dark beyond them where more men stood that he couldn't quite see. "I don't know you," Derek said. His voice was trying to be hard and landing somewhere short of the target. "No," Marcus said, "but I know about you. Open the door, Derek." "I'm not opening anything until you tell me who you—" "The girl came to me," Marcus said. The chain dropped in 4 seconds. The door swung open, and Derek Maddox stood in his own doorway, looking like a man who had just heard a judge read a verdict he'd known was coming, but had been desperately hoping to avoid. He was wearing a dirty white t-shirt and jeans, no shoes. His hands were shaking very slightly at his sides. Marcus walked in. He didn't push past Derek, didn't shoulder him out of the way. He simply walked in, the way a man walks into a space that has already decided to belong to him. And Derek stepped back automatically, the way people step back from something large and moving that isn't going to change its path. Hatch and Big Dan came in behind him. The others stayed outside. That was the part people didn't understand about situations like this. You didn't need everyone in the room. You needed the room to know how many were outside. "Where is she?" Derek's voice cracked on the last word. "Where's Emily? She had my—" "She's safe," Marcus said. He looked around the interior without apparent interest. He was looking for the woman. He spotted her immediately. On the couch against the far wall, lying on her side, a blanket pulled up, her breathing the slow, thick breathing of deep unconsciousness. Too still. The kind of still that wasn't sleep. He crossed to her in 4 strides and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse, weak but present. "How much did she take?" Marcus said without turning around. "What? She took it herself. I didn't give her—" Marcus turned around. He looked at Derek Maddox with the expression of a man who has completely run out of patience for the particular flavor of lie he is currently being offered. "How much?" Derek's shoulders collapsed. "She went through my stash before I noticed. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a gram, maybe a little more." "When?" "Like 2 hours ago." Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. It connected on the second ring. "Need medical at a location. Woman. Overdose. Approximately 2 hours. Opioid or meth. She's breathing, but she's down." He gave the address. "Listen for 3 seconds. "Yeah." He hung up. Derek was staring at him. "You called an ambulance? You're going to bring cops here. You're going to—" "The ambulance is coming for her," Marcus said, his voice dropping to something barely above quiet. "Whatever comes after that is not your primary problem right now." He pulled a chair from the kitchen table, turned it around, and sat on it backward, his arms folded over the top rail, looking at Derek with an expression of absolute patience. "Sit down." Derek sat on the edge of the couch, carefully, a foot away from the unconscious woman who was Emily's mother. "Tell me about the broker," Marcus said. The effect of that name on Derek Maddox's face was immediate and complete. The thin layer of defensive belligerence he'd been holding on to dissolved entirely, replaced by something raw. His eyes went to the door, then to Marcus, then to the floor. His left hand gripped his own knee hard enough that Marcus could see the knuckles whitening from across the room. I don't know who that is," Derek said. "Derek," Marcus's voice was level, "I'm sitting here instead of standing because I'd like this to be a conversation. I need you to help me keep it a conversation. Who is the broker?" "If I talk about him, I'm dead." Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what he does to people who—" "You were going to sell a 7-year-old girl," Marcus said. The words came out flat and factual. "I want you to understand something very clearly. Whatever you think the broker is going to do to you is already the best possible outcome you have left. Because the only thing standing between you and 15 men outside that door is me sitting in this chair. And my patience is not unlimited. Talk." Derek pressed both hands over his face. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then his hands came down, and when they did, something had broken open in his expression. Some last resistance, some final pretense that he still had options. "He runs a network," Derek said. "Kids, young. He finds people like me, guys who are desperate, guys who are in debt, guys who have access to—" He stopped, swallowed. "He finds people with situations, and he connects them with buyers. People with money. People who you wouldn't believe if I told you the names." "Try me," Marcus said. "I don't know names. That's the whole thing. Nobody knows names. He keeps it layered. I was supposed to bring Emily to the airstrip tonight, and a car would be there, and I'd get the cash, and that would be it. I'd never see anyone's face. I'd never know who was in the car." Derek's voice was fraying at the edges. "I know it sounds like I'm trying to make myself sound better than I am. I know how this looks. But I need you to understand, I've never done this before. He's been pressuring me for months because of the money I owe him, and I kept saying no, and then I ran out of ways to say no. The money, Marcus said. How much? 40,000. Hatch, standing against the wall behind Marcus, exhaled through his nose, just barely audible. Big Dan next to him said nothing, but his jaw muscles moved. Who else did you know? Marcus said. Other people in the network, other pickup points, anything. There's a house, Derek said. His voice had gone to almost nothing. He mentioned it once, by accident, I think. He was on the phone. I was supposed to be in the other room, but I heard him say something about the mountain property. The holding house, he called it. I don't know where. Somewhere north, somewhere in the hills. He looked up at Marcus. I heard him say there were others there, other kids. I don't know how many. The temperature in Marcus's mind dropped again. Other kids, not one child that had run out of a trailer into the desert and found the right booth in the right diner. Not a single situation, a single monster to be handled and set aside. A house, a holding place, children in it right now, tonight, while Emily sat in the painted rattler with a finished plate of pancakes in folded hands. Marcus stood up. Derek flinched hard, both hands coming up instinctively. Marcus looked down at him without expression. The airstrip tonight, 3 a.m. What's the protocol? What do you mean? The car arrives, then what? How does the handoff work? Derek blinked. Something shifted in his eyes. A dawning comprehension of where this was going. You're going to go there, he said slowly. In my place. I'm going to be there, Marcus said. So are you, exactly as planned. No. Derek came off the couch, not aggressively, but with the desperate energy of a man refusing a ledge. No, if I show up and something's wrong, if they figure out, nothing will be wrong, Marcus said, because you're going to do exactly what you were going to do and say exactly what you were going to say, except Emily won't be in the car. And when the people at that airstrip show their faces, they're going to be very surprised to find out who came instead. They'll kill me. Derek. Marcus looked at him for one flat, final second. You were going to load a 7-year-old child into a car tonight and hand her to a stranger for $40,000. I am the only reason you are still breathing right now. You do not get to negotiate terms. Derek Maddox sat back down. Outside, a distant wail of sirens was building from the south. Marcus looked at Hatch. When the ambulance gets here, Marcus said, you're going to make sure she gets on it and they understand what she took. Don't let them leave until they're sure she's stable. He paused. Her daughter's going to want to know she's okay. Hatch gave one nod. There was something in his face that was different from his usual expression, something that had been put there by the word daughter. And Derek, Marcus said, he picked up his phone from where he'd set it on the table. He pulled up a map. Show me Airport Road. The next 40 minutes were logistics. Marcus sat across from Derek Maddox and extracted every piece of operational information the man had, methodically, without raising his voice once. The make of the car that was supposed to arrive. The signal, headlights flashed twice on approach. The exchange point, north end of the old runway, near the collapsed windsock. The fact that the broker himself was never at these transactions, always proxies, always layered distance. But then Derek said something that changed everything. Last week, he said, I called in to renegotiate, told him I needed more time. And the voice on the phone, it wasn't his usual guy. It was him, directly. I know it was him because he threatened me with something that only someone at the top could have known. Derek's hands were clasped between his knees. He called me by a nickname from a job I did 6 years ago in Sacramento. Nobody in Nevada knew that name. He knew it. He wanted me to know that he knows everything. Marcus looked at him. And what did his voice sound like? Derek thought about it. Like he was actually working at retrieving the memory precisely. Educated, he said finally. Like a guy on TV. Like someone who gives speeches. He said 3 sentences to me, and every single word landed in the right place. The sirens were loud now. Headlights swept the curtains as the ambulance turned into the gravel drive. Marcus stood. He looked down at Derek one more time. You're going to sit here and cooperate with the medics for Emily's mother. You're going to be calm and helpful, and you're going to answer their questions without volunteering anything extra. And at 2:15 a.m., you are going to get in your truck and drive to Airport Road. He paused. And I'm going to be right behind you the whole way. Derek looked at the door, then back at Marcus. And after tonight, after all this is over, what happens to me? Marcus looked at him for a long, level moment. That depends entirely, he said quietly, on whether everything you told me tonight turns out to be true. He walked out. The desert air hit him, and he stood still for a moment, feeling the heat of the night and listening to the sounds of his men moving around him in the dark. Spider appeared at his right shoulder. What are we working with? Spider said. Airstrip at 3 a.m., Marcus said. 1 vehicle, unknown number of occupants. We go in quiet until we know what we have, and then we adjust. Spider nodded. And the holding house? We get the location from whoever's in that car tonight, Marcus said. One way or another. Spider was quiet for a moment. How many kids do you think are in that house? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the desert dark for a moment. The empty, flat, enormous Nevada dark that went on in every direction without apology. Too many, he said. Spider said nothing after that. The ambulance crew worked fast. Marcus stood back and watched them load Emily's mother onto a stretcher. She was still unconscious, but her color was better, her breathing less labored. One of the paramedics, a young woman, paused on the way past Marcus and looked up at him with an expression that wanted to ask about 15 motorcycles parked on a drug dealer's gravel drive at midnight. Then she clearly decided the question could wait and kept moving. Smart woman. Marcus pulled out his phone and called the diner. Donna picked up on the first ring. She okay? Marcus said. She's asleep, Donna said. Her voice was subdued. She ate everything I put in front of her and then asked if she could lie down in the back booth, and I said yes, and she was out in about 2 minutes. Marcus, Donna paused. She's been talking in her sleep. What's she saying? A long pause on the line. She keeps saying her dad's name, Donna said softly. She keeps saying, I did it, Dad. I did it. Marcus stood very still in the Nevada night with the phone against his ear. Keep the door locked, he said finally. I'll call you before we come back. He hung up. Hatch was beside him when he lowered the phone. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The ambulance was pulling out of the gravel drive, lights going, heading south. You good? Hatch said. Marcus looked at the trailer where Derek Maddox sat alone, with whatever was left of his conscience. He looked at the dark road ahead, the 4 hours until 3 a.m., the airstrip and whoever was driving toward it right now, in a black car that didn't know yet what it was driving into. Let's get into position, Marcus said, and 15 men moved through the dark toward whatever came next. The 2 hours between midnight and 2 a.m. in the Nevada desert are the loneliest hours on Earth. Marcus knew this from experience. He'd spent more than a few of them in places he hadn't chosen, waiting for things he hadn't wanted to happen. And he'd learned that the desert at that hour had a particular quality. It didn't comfort, didn't distract, didn't offer anything to fill the space between a man and whatever he was carrying. It just sat there, enormous and indifferent, and let you think. He didn't want to think right now, so he focused on logistics. The airstrip was a dead piece of infrastructure from another era, 400 yards of cracked concrete with weeds pushing through the expansion joints, a collapsed windsock at the north end, a chain-link fence along the perimeter that had surrendered to age and gravity in several places. No lights, no activity. The kind of place that doesn't exist on anyone's radar unless they specifically know to look for it. Marcus knew it well. The club had used it twice before for purposes that had nothing to do with aviation. He had his men positioned before 2 o'clock. Spider and 2 others along the east fence line, flat in the dark. Hatch and 4 more at the south approach, where the access road came in off the highway. 3 men on the west side. Marcus himself at the north end, near the windsock, with Big Dan beside him, and Derek Maddox's pickup truck parked exactly where Derek had said it would be parked. Because Derek was sitting in it. Because Derek had been given a very clear understanding of what would happen if he wasn't. Derek had driven in silence the whole way. He'd sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and said nothing until he pulled into the airstrip and Marcus opened the passenger door and climbed in beside him. And then Derek had said, very quietly, "I want you to know that I know what I am." Marcus had looked at him. "Then act like someone who's trying to be something else," he said. "Tonight." Derek hadn't spoken again. At 2:47 a.m., Hatch's voice came through on the earpiece. 3 words. Vehicle, south approach. Marcus sat up. Derek made a sound. "Steady," Marcus said. The headlights came in off the access road and moved slowly across the airstrip. Not rushing, not hesitating, the measured pace of someone who had done this before and had no reason to hurry. The vehicle was dark-colored, large, a luxury SUV, moving on the cracked concrete with the particular smoothness of expensive suspension, absorbing bad road. It stopped 30 yards out. The headlights flashed twice. Marcus looked at Derek. Derek reached down and flashed his own headlights twice in response. His hand was shaking enough that the flashes were slightly uneven. Marcus reached over without looking and pressed Derek's hand flat against the dashboard, steadying it. The SUV's driver's door opened. 1 man got out, then a second from the passenger side. Both large, both moving with the contained economy of people trained to move that way. Private security, the kind that didn't come from any government agency. Then the rear door opened, and the man who stepped out was not what Marcus had expected. Not because of anything about his appearance that was remarkable. He was 60, maybe 62, medium height, dressed in slacks and a collared shirt like he'd stepped out of a fundraiser. Silver-haired, the kind of groomed, maintained appearance that spoke of money so old it had forgotten it had ever needed to be earned. His face was familiar in the way that faces become familiar when they appear on charity billboards, in business magazine covers, and the kinds of television programs where people discuss the state of the world with complete confidence that they personally are doing something about it. Marcus knew the face. He sat very still and let the recognition settle into him like ice water, and then he set it aside and moved. He was out of the truck before Derek could process that the door had opened. Big Dan was moving from the other side. Marcus covered the 30 yards between himself and the man in 5 seconds and had the SUV's rear door pressed shut before the security on the passenger side could fully register what was happening. The first security man moved fast. Marcus moved faster. He got an arm around the man's neck in a lock that required no explanation and applied enough pressure to make the explanation irrelevant. The man went down. Big Dan had the driver against the hood of the SUV with one enormous hand between the man's shoulder blades before the driver finished turning around. Spider came out of the dark from the east. Hatch came up from the south. The man in the collared shirt stood completely still through all of it. He didn't run, didn't shout. He stood with his hands slightly away from his body and watched Marcus approach him with the expression of someone who had prepared themselves for this possibility and had decided in advance how they were going to conduct themselves when it arrived. "Mr. Cole," he said. Marcus stopped. The man knew his name, had said it immediately, without hesitation, with the calm delivery of someone making an introduction at a dinner party. "You know who I am," Marcus said. It was not a question. "I know who you are," the man said. "I also know that you are not Derek Maddox, and that Emily Carter is not in that truck, and that the people you have positioned around this airstrip number approximately 15. He paused. "I counted the engine sounds when you arrived. Old habit." He tilted his head slightly. "I had wondered when Derek went silent after midnight, whether the evening would unfold differently than planned. Now I know. He was, Marcus realized, genuinely unafraid, not performing calm, actually calm. The calm of someone who had a reason to be. "Get down on the ground," Marcus said. "Mr. Cole, on the ground." The man looked at Marcus for one moment. Then he lowered himself, carefully, with the particular deliberateness of a man in expensive slacks, choosing how he was going to do this, and sat on the concrete. Marcus crouched in front of him. "The Holding House," he said. "In the hills. How many children?" The man's expression didn't change. "I think," he said, "that you're approaching this incorrectly. I'm not going to respond to pressure. I've dealt with pressure at levels that would restructure your understanding of the concept. What I might respond to is a conversation." "This is a conversation," Marcus said. "Where is the house?" "Before I answer that question," the man said, "I need you to understand something. If you approach that property incorrectly, if you go in loud, if law enforcement is involved, if there is any disruption to the structure that isn't surgically precise, the people managing that location have instructions. The children don't leave." The silence after that sentence had a physical quality. Marcus felt Hatch, standing behind him, go absolutely rigid. "You're threatening children," Marcus said. His voice had dropped to something barely audible. "I'm informing you of operational reality," the man said. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm telling you that the people at that property are not like Derek Maddox. They're not desperate men making bad decisions under financial pressure. They are professionals, and they have contingency protocols. And if they believe they're being raided, those protocols activate." He held Marcus's gaze. "I am the only person who can call them off." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Then you're going to call them off," Marcus said. "That requires a negotiation," the man said. "You don't have anything to negotiate with." "I have the address," the man said, "and I have the phone number, and I have the code word that tells the people at that property that everything is normal and to stand down." He paused. "Without those three things, Mr. Cole, you could spend the next 6 hours driving through the hills, looking at dark driveways, and find nothing. And by morning that house will be empty, and the trail will be cold, and the children will be somewhere else entirely." Marcus stood up. He looked at the man on the concrete for a moment, then looked at Hatch. Hatch shook his head once. Not a disagreement, a response to something that was building behind his eyes that had nothing to do with tactical thinking. Marcus pulled out his phone and did something none of the men around him expected. He played a voice recording. The voice on the recording was a man's voice, educated, precise, every word landing in the right place. Speaking to Derek Maddox about a nickname from a Sacramento job 6 years ago. Applying pressure, making clear the nature of the relationship. The man on the concrete went very still. "Derek's phone was in his shirt pocket," Marcus said. "From the moment we arrived at his trailer. He agreed to that arrangement in exchange for a guarantee I'd get his daughter." Marcus paused, and the word landed the way he intended. "Out of this situation alive. He called you back at 12:40 using his own phone and held the line open for 4 minutes. You spoke for 2 of them." He looked down at the man. "The recording exists in 3 places right now. One of them is a cloud server I don't personally control, which means even if something happens to me tonight, the recording doesn't disappear." The man on the concrete was still for a moment, then something moved across his face. Not fear exactly, but a recalibration, a reassessment. The expression of someone who had been holding a strong hand and just discovered there was a stronger one across the table. "The address," Marcus said, "and the phone number, and the code word." A pause. "North on 93, the man said. 14 miles. Private road on the left, unmarked, between 2 white fence posts. Quarter mile in, a gate with a keypad. Code is 7743. He paused. "The phone number is in my breast pocket. The code word is Clearwater." Marcus reached into the man's breast pocket and retrieved a business card with a number written on the back in pen. "How many children?" Marcus said. "3," the man said, "ages 6 through 10. "How many personnel on site?" "4, armed but not expecting any contact tonight." Marcus looked at the card. Then he looked back down at the man on the concrete. "If any of that is wrong," he said, "if I get to that gate and the code doesn't work, or I make that call and Clearwater doesn't land right, I'm going to know that you made a decision tonight. And you're going to want to pray that I'm the one who comes back here to respond to it, and not the men I'm leaving with you." He stood. He looked at Hatch. "You're with me. Spider takes this location." He glanced at Big Dan. "Nobody leaves. Nobody calls anybody. If either of those security people wake up and have opinions about that, educate them." Big Dan said, "Understood." Spider was already moving. Marcus walked back to Derek's truck. Derek was sitting in the driver's seat looking at him through the windshield with the expression of a man who has just watched a chess match in a language he doesn't speak and is trying to determine whether the outcome was good or bad for him. Marcus opened the driver's door. "Out," he said. Derek got out. "You're staying here," Marcus said. "Hatch's men are going to be here. You are not going to touch that man. You are not going to speak to that man, and you are not going to go anywhere. When this is over, your cooperation tonight goes on record. What happens after that is up to people who make those decisions." He paused. Emily's mother was alive when she left in the ambulance. That's more than she might have been. Derek stood in the dark desert with his hands at his sides. He looked like a man who had been emptied out. "Those other kids," he said, "you're going to get them." It wasn't a question. It was something else, a need for confirmation that wasn't about him, that had nothing to do with his own situation. Something very small and very genuine in the voice of a man who had otherwise tonight demonstrated almost every variety of failure a person could demonstrate. "Yes," Marcus said. He took Derek's keys and got into the truck. Hatch climbed in the passenger side. "You want to call the kids' services? FBI? Get ahead of this?" "The moment we involve anyone with a badge," Marcus said, starting the engine, "that man back there starts lawyering up, starts trading information for immunity, starts pulling every string he has. And he has a lot of strings." Marcus pulled out onto the access road. He said it himself. Judges, politicians, people who think they're untouchable. You call the feds tonight, and by morning, 3 of those people are on the phone with someone who can make evidence disappear. He looked at the road ahead. "We get the kids out first, then we deal with what comes after." Hatch was quiet for a moment. "And if the code doesn't work?" "Then we go over the fence," Marcus said simply. They drove north on 93 in the truck with 7 Harleys running dark behind them, headlights off, navigating by the ambient glow of the highway, a skill that required either experience or recklessness, and in their case was both. Marcus had one hand on the wheel and one eye on the odometer. 14 miles in the Nevada hills at 3 in the morning. He thought about Emily. He thought about her sitting in that diner booth at midnight, gripping his vest with one hand, asking the question in a voice that was trying very hard not to shake. He thought about her stealing the backpack, about the $20 bill she'd kept for bus fare, about what Donna had said on the phone. She keeps saying her dad's name. She keeps saying, "I did it, Dad. I did it." The odometer hit 14 miles. 2 white fence posts on the left. Marcus turned. The private road was rough and unpaved, and the truck handled it with complaint. A quarter-mile in, the headlights picked up a gate, heavy, steel, with a keypad mounted on a post to the left. Marcus stopped the truck and got out. He punched in 7743. The gate clicked, swung inward. Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He pulled out the business card with the phone number and dialed. It rang once, twice. A voice answered, flat, professional, monitoring. "Clearwater," Marcus said. A pause. "Copy," the voice said. "Status?" "Delayed arrival," Marcus said. "Stand by." Copy. He hung up. He looked at Hatch. Hatch looked back at him. Behind them, the 7 Harleys had stopped at the fence line, and their riders were dismounting, moving in the dark with practiced quiet, taking positions without being told. "We go in soft," Marcus said. "I want those 4 people contained before they know we're there. No noise if we can avoid it." He checked the time. 3:22 a.m. "And we are very, very aware that we are looking for 3 children in that house who are going to be terrified of everyone, including us." Hatch nodded. "What do we tell them when we find them?" Marcus thought about what he'd said to Emily in the diner, how he'd used her name first, how he'd kept his voice level and his hands still and let her lead. He thought about what had worked and what had been instinct and what had been the same thing. "The truth," Marcus said. "We tell them the truth." He walked through the gate. The house was dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that sat over a place that contained sleeping people, or people pretending to sleep, or people who had been told to wait and were waiting. Marcus moved toward it in the dark and felt the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. A diner, a girl, a vest, a question pressing against the back of his mind. 3 children in that house, 6 to 10 years old, waiting in the dark with no idea that 15 men who the world called monsters were moving toward them through the Nevada night. He reached the front door. He looked at it for 1 second, and then Marcus Cole, the man they called Graveyard, who had spent 27 years making the world afraid of him, raised his hand and knocked. Softly, 3 measured raps. The same knock as Derek's door. The knock that said, "I know you're in there, and I am not in a hurry." Except this time it meant something different. This time it meant, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Nobody answered the door. That was the first wrong thing. Marcus had said Clearwater on the phone 4 minutes ago. The voice on the other end had said, "Copy," which meant someone inside that house knew that a truck had come through the gate and that everything was supposedly normal. Which meant if everything was normal, someone should have answered the door. He stepped back from the entrance and looked at Hatch. Hatch had already shifted his weight to the balls of his feet. His eyes were moving across the front of the house, the way they moved across things when Hatch had stopped expecting good outcomes and started preparing for the alternative. "They heard the engines," Hatch said quietly. "The bikes, before we cut the lights." Marcus processed this in about 1 second. 7 motorcycles, even running dark, were not silent machines. In the still Nevada hills at 3 in the morning, the sound would have carried differently than on an open highway. Compressed against the hillside, bounced back, arriving from directions that didn't make sense for a single arriving truck. Someone inside had heard something they hadn't expected and had made a decision about it. "Back door," Marcus said. He moved left, fast and low, and Hatch went right without being told. The men who had come up behind them split and flowed around the perimeter of the house like water around a stone, automatic and silent, the way men move when they have done this enough times that the thinking and the doing have merged into a single continuous action. Marcus reached the back of the house and stopped. The back door was open, not standing ajar, fully open, swinging slightly in the night air, a rectangle of interior darkness beyond it, and on the ground just outside the threshold, a radio, the kind of 2-way handheld that security personnel carry. Lying face down in the dirt like it had been dropped in a hurry. Someone had run. Marcus stepped inside. The interior was dark, but his eyes had been adjusted for an hour, and he moved through it with his hands out, reading the space through contact and sound. A kitchen, a hallway. He could hear from somewhere ahead and to the left the sound of breathing. Several people, close together, the slightly elevated rhythm of people trying to be very quiet while being afraid. He stopped in the hallway. "My name is Marcus," he said. His voice was low and even. Not a whisper. A whisper carried its own kind of fear. A normal voice, pitched low, the way you'd talk to someone you didn't want to startle. "I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'm here because of a girl named Emily. Silence. Then from behind the door at the end of the hallway, the sound of movement. Small movement. The sound small people made when they shifted position. Marcus walked to the door and tried the handle. Locked from the outside with a deadbolt. He pulled the key ring he'd taken from the security man at the airstrip. The man had been carrying 4 keys on a plain ring, and Marcus had made a calculated assumption and tried the second one. The bolt turned. He pushed the door open slowly. He kept his hands visible. He crouched down before his eyes fully adjusted because he had thought about this on the drive over. Coming in standing at full height in the dark was the wrong entry for what was on the other side of this door. And Marcus Cole, who had spent his life being the most physically imposing thing in any room, understood for the first time in a long time that his size was a liability that needed to be managed. 3 children. They were huddled together on a bare mattress in the far corner, 2 girls and a boy, pressed against each other with the instinctive solidarity of people facing something larger than themselves. The oldest might have been 10. The youngest was small enough that Marcus had to adjust his estimate. Maybe 5, not 6. Her eyes were the largest things in her face. None of them made a sound. Marcus stayed crouched. He put one hand flat on the floor in front of him, palm down, the way you approach an animal that has been cornered. He kept his voice exactly the same as it had been in the hallway. Emily sent us, he said. The oldest girl, dark hair maybe 9 or 10, with the careful, watchful eyes of a child who had learned to read adult behavior the way other kids learn to read books, looked at him and said, "Who's Emily?" "A girl who got away," Marcus said, "and she wanted to make sure you got away too." The boy, who was maybe 7, had both arms around the younger girl. He didn't let go of her, but he looked at Marcus with a directness that reminded Marcus, sharply and completely, of Emily sitting in that booth. Something about the way these children, these particular children, looked at the world, like they had already burned through whatever reserve of innocence buffers a child against direct reality, and what was left was just clear-eyed and present and waiting. "Are you police?" the boy asked. "No," Marcus said. "Then what are you?" Marcus thought about how to answer that for exactly 1 second. "I'm the person Emily found," he said. The boy looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked at the 2 girls. Some decision moved between the 3 of them through the mechanism of shared glances that children develop when they have been through something together. Then the boy nodded once. "Okay," he said. Marcus stood, slowly keeping his hands visible, and stepped back from the doorway to give them room. "Come on," he said. "Take your time, nobody's rushing." The oldest girl stood first. She took the younger girl's hand, and the boy stayed close on the other side. And they came through the doorway together in a tight cluster, moving the way people move when they have decided to trust something they're not completely sure about, but have run out of better options. Hatch was standing in the kitchen when Marcus came through with the 3 children. Marcus watched something move across Hatch's face. A man who had ridden with Marcus for 20 years and had never, in all of that time, shown Marcus his full emotional range. And Hatch pressed his lips together hard and turned away for a moment and looked at the ceiling. "Hatch," Marcus said. "Yeah," Hatch's voice was steady. "I'm good. Get them to the truck." Hatch turned back. He looked at the 3 children standing in the kitchen, and then he crouched down to their level, and he said in the gentlest voice Marcus had ever heard come out of that man's body, "You hungry? Because I know a diner with really good pancakes." The youngest girl looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Do they have chocolate milk?" Hatch looked up at Marcus. "Donna will find chocolate milk," Marcus said. Outside, the situation had resolved itself with less drama than Marcus had anticipated and considerably more than he'd hoped. 2 of the 4 security personnel had run when they heard the bikes, a decision Marcus filed under stupid but survivable. The other 2 had stayed and made different decisions, and those decisions had resulted in both of them currently sitting on the ground with their hands behind their heads and Spider standing behind them with an expression that discouraged any reconsideration of that posture. The third security man, the one who had come out the back door and dropped his radio, had made it as far as the tree line before two of Marcus's men had materialized out of the dark on either side of him and escorted him back. He was sitting with the other two now. He looked like a man whose life choices were actively reviewing themselves in real time. Marcus stood in front of the three of them and felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. Not fatigue, he'd been running on something beyond fatigue for hours, but the particular gravity that comes when a situation has moved past violence into the territory of consequence. The children were safe. That was the fulcrum. Everything else rotated around that. The men who ran, Marcus said to Spider, how far do they get? They're on foot in the Nevada hills at 3:40 a.m., Spider said. They get tired. Make sure they're found, Marcus said, not by us. Spider understood. He pulled out his phone. One of the seated security men, broad, mid-40s, with a military bearing that had clearly been repurposed in a private direction, looked up at Marcus with an expression that was not quite defiant and not quite cooperative. Somewhere in the compressed middle. You know what you've walked into, he said. I'm standing in it, Marcus said. Keep going. The man at the airstrip, the security man said. Do you know who he is? Not his name. I mean, do you know what he actually represents? The connections, the infrastructure, the people who... I know exactly who he is, Marcus said. I recognized him in about 4 seconds. This appeared to genuinely surprise the security man. Some recalibration happened behind his eyes. Then you know that whatever you're thinking about doing next, whatever you think is going to happen now that you've got these kids out, there are people, Marcus said, who think that having power means not having to face consequences. I've met a lot of those people. They're always very confident right up until the moment they aren't. He crouched in front of the security man. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to sit here until I make a call. Then some people are going to arrive, and you're going to tell them everything you know. And you're going to do it because the alternative is that I leave you here in the hills and let the man at the airstrip figure out that the loose end is you. The security man's jaw tightened. Who are you calling? Someone I trust, Marcus said, which narrows the field considerably. He stood and walked away from them and pulled out his phone. He stood alone for a moment, and he scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 3 years. A man named Decker, who was not law enforcement and had never been law enforcement, but who existed in the specific negative space between the world Marcus occupied and the world that operated in courtrooms and congressional hearings. A man who knew how information moved and where it went and what it could do when it arrived at the right place at the right time. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, rough with sleep. This better be extraordinary. It is, Marcus said. I need you awake and I need you listening. He talked for 6 minutes. Decker didn't interrupt. When Marcus finished, there was a silence on the line that had a particular quality. The silence of someone reassembling what they knew about the world to accommodate what they had just been told. You have the recording, Decker said, in 3 places. And the children are physically secure. In my truck right now. And the man himself is being held at the airstrip. Until I decide otherwise. Another pause. Then Decker said, Marcus, the name you just told me, do you understand the level of... I understand everything, Marcus said, which is why I'm calling you and not someone with a badge. I need this to land somewhere it can't be made to disappear. That's a very short list. I know, Marcus said. You're on it. Who else? He heard Decker moving, heard what sounded like a drawer opening, a pen on paper. Give me 2 hours, Decker said. Keep those children with you. Keep that man at the airstrip contained. And Marcus, the hard drive. You said he mentioned a client list. He did. That is everything, Decker said. If that list exists and it's what he described, judges, elected officials, people with federal appointments, that is the entire case. Everything else is circumstantial without the list. Marcus looked at the dark hills around him. He thought about the man at the airstrip, sitting on cracked concrete in expensive slacks, calm, already calculating his next move. He thought about what a man like that would have done with a list like that. Whether he would carry it on a hard drive at all, or whether that had been said in the moment, a calculated piece of information designed to show Marcus that cooperating was the better option. "I'll get the list," Marcus said. "How?" "I'm going to ask him for it," Marcus said. Decker made a sound that might have been a laugh from a man who wasn't quite awake enough to fully commit to it. 2 hours, he said. "Don't let him go anywhere." Marcus hung up. He walked back to the truck. Through the windshield, he could see Hatch in the back seat with the 3 children arranged around him like he was a piece of furniture they had decided was safe. The youngest girl had apparently fallen asleep against Hatch's arm. Hatch was sitting completely still, with the deliberate non-movement of a man who would rather stop breathing than disturb a sleeping child. Marcus opened the driver's door, and Hatch looked at him. "I need to go back to the airstrip," Marcus said. "I know," Hatch said. "I'll stay with them." Marcus looked at the 3 children in the back seat. Then he looked at Hatch and said quietly, "She asked me tonight, back at the diner before all of this. She asked me what I was going to do, and I said we're going to start with Derek." He paused. "She said he has a gun in the freezer, like it was information she'd been saving, like she'd cataloged it." Hatch looked at him. 7 years old, Marcus said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You get some things young that stay with you forever," Hatch said finally, "and you get some things young that you spend the rest of your life wishing you could put down." He looked at the sleeping girl against his arm. "Some of it depends on who shows up." Marcus drove back to the airstrip alone. The man was still sitting on the concrete. Spider had a folding camp chair. He carried one in his saddlebag, a habit born of years of waiting in outdoor locations. Set up a few yards away, and was sitting in it reading something on his phone with the particular composure of a man who had made peace with the idea that tonight was going to be long. Marcus crouched in front of the man on the concrete. "The client list," Marcus said. "Where is it?" The man looked at him. His calm had not degraded in the hours since Marcus had left him here. If anything, it had settled deeper, become more foundational. "You've been busy," he said. "The children are out," Marcus said. "Your people at the property are being handed to people who will handle them correctly. The recording is in 3 locations, and one of them is already in the hands of someone who knows what to do with it." He paused. "The only thing I don't have yet is the list. And that list is the difference between this ending the way it should end and this ending the way this usually end, with powerful people making arrangements and the machinery grinding down to protect the ones at the top." The man was quiet for a moment. He looked at the sky, the particular Nevada sky at 4 a.m., more stars than any city person remembered existed, the kind of sky that made everything on the ground feel very small and very specific. "You know why I'm calm," the man said. "It's not because I'm not afraid. It's because I've been in situations like this before, and I've observed something consistent. People like you, people who exist outside the rules, who operate on their own code, you always stop at a certain point. You always find the line you won't cross. And that line is the thing that the people I work with have learned to count on." "And you think I have that line?" Marcus said. "Everyone does." "The list," Marcus said. The man looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Encrypted drive. Inside panel of the rear passenger door of the SUV. You'll need a code to open the panel." He paused. 8821. Marcus stood. He walked to the SUV, found the panel exactly where the man had said, entered the code. A section of the interior trim released. Inside, in a foam-lined cavity, a black hard drive no larger than a deck of cards. He held it up. And then from the south, from the direction of the highway, he heard something. Sirens, coming fast. More than 1 unit, maybe 3 or 4. The layered wail of a serious response, at serious speed. Marcus looked at the access road. Then he looked at Spider. Spider was already on his feet. He had his phone in his hand, and his expression was specific. The expression of a man who has received information that changes the shape of the situation. "Blue Nevada state plates," Spider said. "Someone called it in." "Who?" Spider looked at him. "Decker says it's coming from inside, from someone who knew we were going to be here tonight." He paused. "Someone who wanted to make sure whatever we found didn't leave this airstrip." Marcus stood very still. He looked at the man on the concrete who had not moved, who was looking back at him with that same bottomless calm. "You made a call," Marcus said. "I had a phone in my shoe," the man said. "Old habit, the same one that helped me count engines." The sirens were very close now, maybe 2 minutes out. Marcus looked at the hard drive in his hand. He looked at Spider. He looked at Hatch's direction, north up the highway, where 3 children were asleep in a truck. "The drive goes with me," Marcus said. He looked at Spider. "Get on the bikes. Northern exit through the fence break at the east end. You know the one. Go now." "And you?" Spider said. Marcus looked at the approaching lights, then at the man on the concrete, then at the hard drive. "I'm going to finish the conversation," Marcus said. Spider moved. Behind him, engines came alive in the dark. Marcus stood his ground and waited for the sirens. Because Marcus Cole had learned something in 27 years of living outside the rules, that the man on the concrete, for all his calm and all his calculation, had never fully understood. The line he won't cross isn't the thing that limits him. The first patrol car came in fast and stopped hard, its headlights flooding the airstrip in white light that made everything flat and overexposed. The second unit came in right behind it, then a third. 4 officers out of the cars before the dust settled, hands on weapons, taking positions with the trained urgency of people responding to a call that had used specific words. Words that moved dispatch to a higher response level. Marcus stood exactly where he had been standing when he heard the sirens. He hadn't moved. He hadn't hidden the hard drive. He held it at his side in his right hand, in plain sight, because the worst thing a man in his position could do at this moment was look like he was concealing something from armed officers who were already primed for a specific narrative. The man on the concrete hadn't moved either. He was still sitting with his hands visible, and Marcus noticed, with the part of his mind that never stopped cataloging, that the man had straightened slightly when the lights came in. Not in fear, in anticipation, like a performer hearing his cue. The lead officer came forward, late 40s, captain's insignia, the particular bearing of a man who had been important in a specific geography for long enough that he had stopped separating himself from that importance. His name tag said, Rourke. He looked at Marcus, looked at the man on the concrete, looked at the disabled security personnel against the SUV, and then looked back at Marcus with an expression that had already reached a conclusion. "Marcus Cole," Rourke said. "Captain," Marcus said. "Put the device on the ground and step away from it." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "No," he said. The word landed in the space between them and sat there. One of the officers behind Rourke shifted his weight. Marcus tracked the movement with his peripheral vision and didn't react to it. "Mr. Cole," Rourke's voice had taken on the particular tone of authority that had decided it needed to assert itself. "You are at a crime scene in possession of what appears to be evidence. You will put that device on the ground." "In a minute," Marcus said. "First, I need you to understand what you're actually standing in the middle of." He looked at Rourke steadily. 3 children were held in a house 14 miles north of here tonight. They are currently in a vehicle with members of my club, safe and unharmed. The man sitting on that concrete behind me is the operating head of a child trafficking network that has been running in this state and 4 others for at least 6 years. This drive contains his client list, and the call that brought you here tonight, the call that told dispatch there was a violent situation at this airstrip, came from a phone that man was carrying in his shoe. Rourke looked at Marcus, Then he looked at the man on the concrete. The man on the concrete looked back at Rourke with that same profound calm. And Rourke's expression did something Marcus had been watching for and had hoped he wouldn't see. It didn't open up with shock or outrage or the particular alertness of a law enforcement officer confronting something that demanded his full professional engagement. Instead, something in it closed, compressed, a door quietly shutting. "Mr. Cole," Rourke said, "the device, on the ground." Marcus felt the confirmation of it settle into his chest like a stone dropping into still water. He had wondered, driving back to the airstrip, he had run the probability. A captain who responded personally at 4 a.m. to a call at a remote airstrip, who arrived with 3 units already coordinated, who looked at a man on the concrete and didn't ask a single question about who he was or why he was there. The man at the airstrip had said it in the SUV hours ago. Judges, politicians, CEOs, people who think they are untouchable. He hadn't mentioned law enforcement because law enforcement was so obvious it went without saying. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached for it slowly, telegraphing the movement, and looked at the screen. A text from Decker. 4 words. "It's live. All platforms." Marcus looked at the text for 1 second. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and looked at Rourke. "Captain," he said, "I need you to take out your own phone right now and search your name." Rourke's expression tightened. "I'm not going to search your name," Marcus said, "right now, because in the last 3 minutes, a recording has been uploaded to 17 separate media platforms and 3 federal tip portals. The recording includes a conversation between this man," he gestured behind him, "and a Nevada law enforcement official discussing the management of tonight's operation. That official is referred to by name and badge number." He paused. "Your name, Captain. Your badge number." The desert went absolutely still. One of the officers behind Rourke pulled out his phone. Marcus watched the man's face as he looked at the screen, watched his expression move through several stages in about 4 seconds, and then watched him look up at Rourke with an expression that had just subtracted years of loyalty in a single moment. Rourke stood very still. The man on the concrete made a sound. It was small and contained and almost nothing, and Marcus turned and looked at him. And for the first time since Marcus had dragged him out of the SUV 6 hours ago, the man's face had changed. The calm was still there, but it had cracked, just slightly, at the edges, the way good porcelain cracks. A hairline fracture that didn't destroy the shape, but made the damage visible. He had not known about the recording with Rourke. That piece had been assembled without him. "Decker had Rourke from a separate thread," Marcus said to him quietly. 3 months of financial records. The recording just confirmed context. He held up the hard drive. "And this is going to confirm everything else." He looked at the officer who had pulled out his phone, then at the 2 others who had done the same and were now standing with the particular posture of people who have just discovered that the ground under their professional lives has been reclassified. He looked at Rourke last. Rourke's hand had come off his weapon. His shoulders had dropped 2 inches. He was looking at something in the middle distance that had nothing to do with the physical airstrip. "There are federal agents 20 minutes out," Marcus said. "Decker's people. They have jurisdiction, and they have the recording, and they have chain of custody documentation for everything that's happened here tonight." He walked forward 3 steps and held the hard drive out to the officer closest to him, the young one, the one who had looked at his phone first. "You're going to take this, and you're going to hold it, and you are not going to give it to him. When the federal agents arrive, you hand it to them personally. You understand?" The young officer looked at Marcus. He looked at the drive. He looked at Rourke. Then he took the drive. "Yes, sir," he said. It was the "sir" that did it. Marcus hadn't expected it, and it landed strangely. Not uncomfortable, just unexpected, like a sound from a direction you weren't watching. He looked at Rourke one last time. "Step aside, Captain." Rourke stepped aside. Marcus walked to his bike.
The ride back to the Painted Rattler took 23 minutes. The sun was not up yet, but the sky had begun its preliminary work. The black fading to a dark blue at the eastern edge. The stars in that direction losing their definition. Marcus rode alone with the desert spreading out on both sides, and the wind against his face, and let the night decompress in layers, the way a deep sea diver rises slowly to avoid the bends. Too much, too fast, and something tears. Hatch had called ahead. When Marcus pulled into the diner parking lot, Donna had the lights on and the door unlocked, and the 3 children from the house in the hills were sitting in the large corner booth with hot chocolate and plates of scrambled eggs that they were working through with the focused intensity of children who had not been fed adequately in recent memory. The youngest girl, the one who had fallen asleep against Hatch's arm, had chocolate at the corner of her mouth and didn't know it. And Donna, passing with a cloth, wiped it off so gently that the girl didn't even look up from her eggs. Marcus sat down in his usual booth. He sat there for a moment in the quiet and the warmth and the ordinary domestic sounds of a diner at 5 a.m. The coffee maker cycling, the faint music from the kitchen radio, the small voices of children eating, and he felt something release in his chest that he hadn't known was held. Marcus. He looked up. Emily was standing at the edge of his booth. She was wearing the same torn yellow dress she'd walked in with 12 hours ago, and her hair was still tangled, and her feet were still bare, and she was looking at him with those enormous brown eyes that didn't miss anything and never had. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Marcus said. She looked at him for a moment, checking the statement against some internal measure. Then she climbed into the booth across from him, the same seat she'd sat in at midnight, and looked at him across the table. "The other kids," she said. "Are they okay?" "They're in the corner booth," Marcus said. Emily turned and looked. She looked at the 3 children, strangers to her, children she had never met, children whose existence she had not known about when she ran through the desert with a stolen backpack and made a calculation about which man in a diner was the right man to run to. She looked at them for a long moment, and Marcus watched her face do something complicated and private and real. Something that didn't have a clean name. Then she turned back to Marcus. "How did you know?" she asked. "To go get them?" "You told me about the broker," Marcus said. "You told me Derek was scared on the phone. You gave me everything I needed to know that this was bigger than one man in one trailer." He looked at her steadily. "You figured it out, Emily, before any of it happened. You saw it and you acted on it, and you walked into a room full of strangers and found the right person to tell." Emily considered this. "I wasn't sure you were the right person," she said. "I just thought you were probably the only person scary enough." "That's the same thing," Marcus said. She almost smiled. Almost, it got to the edge of her face and then pulled back, like she wasn't quite ready for it yet. She put both hands flat on the table the way she'd done at midnight, that same gesture, contained and deliberate. "My mom," she said. "The hospital said she's stable. Donna told me." She paused. "I don't know what happens next, for me, for where I go." Marcus looked at her. He thought about what came next, the federal agents at the airstrip, the unraveling of everything the hard drive contained, the long institutional machinery of consequence and care that would eventually engage itself around 4 children and their situations. He thought about the things he could not control and the things he could. "There are people," he said carefully, "who are going to make sure you're taken care of. Good people, people I trust." He paused. "And wherever you end up, whatever happens next, you're not going to disappear. You understand me? I'm going to know where you are." Emily looked at him. "You're going to check on me?" "Yes," Marcus said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" Marcus looked at this 7-year-old girl who had run 4 miles barefoot through a Nevada desert and stolen a drug dealer's assets and made a tactical decision in a diner at midnight,
and inadvertently dismantled a trafficking network that had operated invisibly for 6 years. And he thought about how to answer that question honestly. "Because your father was a Marine," he said, "and Marines don't leave people behind, and neither do I." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then finally the smile made it all the way to her face. Small, exhausted, completely genuine. She reached into the pocket of her torn yellow dress and put something on the table between them. The $20 bill, the one she'd held back for bus fare. "I don't think I need this anymore," she said. Marcus looked at the bill on the table. He looked at Emily. He reached out, slowly, the same telegraph movement he'd used at the door of the house in the hills, and slid the bill back across the table toward her. "Keep it," he said. "Your dad was right. If you're going to do something, do it all the way." He held her gaze. "You did it all the way, kid." 6 months later, the Painted Rattler Diner made the news for the first time in its unremarkable history. Not for the food, not for the location, but because a photograph taken inside it went quietly viral. A large man in a leather vest with a death's head patch, gray-haired and scarred and enormous, sitting in a back booth. And across from him, a small girl in bright sneakers, a tiny leather vest made to her measurements by a Nevada motorcycle club, and a smile that had absolutely nothing complicated in it. The comments on the photograph ran into the thousands. Most of them said some version of the same thing, that they hadn't expected to feel what they felt when they saw it, that something about it hit differently, that they weren't sure exactly why. Marcus Cole, who had been called Graveyard for 27 years, who had been feared across 3 states, who had sat in that same booth through 11 years of bad coffee and good thinking, read exactly none of the comments. He was too busy passing Emily the syrup. Because the most dangerous man in the Nevada desert had learned something on a Thursday night in July that no amount of years on the road had taught him. That courage doesn't announce itself, doesn't come in the size you expect, and doesn't ask for permission before it walks through a door and changes everything. Sometimes it comes in at 42 pounds, barefoot, with dirt on its dress and a stolen backpack, and a question that nobody in the room is prepared to answer. And sometimes the right answer to that question is the simplest one in the world. You already found your family, kid. You just had to find us first.